Hello again. So now we're up to chapter 24, the First World War. So this is kind of a lengthy chapter, and I'll kind of go over the aspects of it and how it affected everybody within Europe at that point in time, and of course later on the United States. So this is a different type of war than any of the other wars that we talked about. It was more mechanized, mechanized methods of killing, unlike previous wars. This is due to the Industrial Revolution that we talked about previously. So things are going to change. Different methods are going to be put into play as well. You basically have two different groups that are fighting against each other. You have the Triple Entente, which is basically like the Allies at this point in time. So you have Great Britain, France, and Russia uniting together. And then you have the Triple Alliance, also known as the Central Powers. You have Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy that's going to be involved. So how did this whole entire conflict, the whole entire war started? It started because Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria, on June 28th of 1914, he was assassinated in Sarajevo in Bosnia by a Serbian nationalistic group also known as the Black Hand. So the Austrians basically wanted to cause a war to crush the Serbians because they basically assassinated their, leader at that point in time. So that caused the first conflict. So after that, of course, allies are going to unite together, to stand against, other countries. So now you have this whole entire war that's going to be embroiled up. There's going to be a couple of different campaigns that we'll talk about. So the first one was the battle at the Marne. So the Marne was a strategic battle of the war. In 1914, the Ottoman Empire ended up joining both Germany and Austria as part of the Triple Alliance, or the Central Powers. And then in 1915, Italy joined the Allies as well. So you have a lot more countries getting involved as time goes on. There was also the Gallipoli campaign, which was a naval attack. So not only, like I mentioned, the mechanized forms of killing, now we have not only just battles that are fought on land, but now we also have naval battles that are coming about as well. On May 7th, 1915, you have the German submarine, the U-20. It torpedoed the Lusitania. So Lusitania was a ship. It killed 1,198 people and 128 Americans. So this basically, because they killed U.S. people and the fact that it did attack a ship, a neutral ship, mind you, despite the fact that it was, holding, some military, things on that ship, it provoked the United States to get involved in the war and join the Triple Entente. So they're going to join Great Britain, France, Russia to the war. The First World War is also known as for trench warfare. Within the trenches, there was about 25,000 miles worth of trenches, specifically on the Western Front. So we're talking about France, that territory is where a lot of the trenches were. In February 1916, we have the Battle of Verdun. It was led by Henri Pétain of France, and it was a victory for France at that point in time, one of the most. Another battle was the Battle of the Somme, which was basically Great Britain against Germany. In 1916, it was one of the first times that we actually see a tank being used in the First World War. The war at sea, specifically between Germany and Britain, was basically indecisive. Both the Germans and the Britons, they did not want to lose their heavily expensive battleships, basically being a battleground. So at that point in time, it was pretty indecisive. So let's talk about the strains of the war and what ended up happening. So women were involved in the war specifically because they worked in factories, factories that would make shells that they would use for explosions, things that were going to help to make tanks. So they were on the forefront in that aspect as well. So ultimately, the strains of the war. So it cost millions of dollars for a lot of countries. It caused constraints on clothes, fuel, and food. It also caused undernourishment because the aftermath is going to cause economic repercussions for Europe that's going to last for a very, very long time. Prices are going to skyrocket, so things are going to go up in price. And the First World War also had an impact of total war. So think about what total war means. In my nutshell, so total war basically means that it involves everybody, from the women working in the factories to the men that are fighting on the fields to the people that are involved in the hospitals taking care of the wounded. So it kind of has a whole aspect altogether that everyone's playing an important role in the war front. Okay, so that's the First World War. And of course, if you study and you read the chapter, you'll understand that the Allies were the ones that were victorious. So Great Britain and France and the like in the United States. In 1917, we have the Russian Revolution. So that was basically coming off of a variety of different things that was going on in Russia at that point in time. In 1905, we have the October Revolution, which involved Rasputin and the Romanovs that the book talks about. So I recommend reviewing over that. Russia thought that World War I would also end quickly. but that really didn't happen. They thought there was just going to be a quick, decisive battle, maybe last a couple months, but the First World War did last a handful of years over a period of time. Internally in Russia, there was conflict going on. And in 1917, we had the first revolt. And it was basically due for economic reasons. After all these wars, after all these conflicts, everybody was hurting, including Russia. So people of Russia, they demanded food, fuel, and of course, political reform. They wanted, kind of the monarchy, that Tsar, to kind of go away. And they wanted things to change, within the country. So we have this group known as the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks were the ones that are going to be responsible for the October Revolution. The Bolsheviks were a branch of the Russian socialist movement, and they wanted to overthrow the provisional government. They wanted to overthrow the monarchy and change things. You had another group also involved known as the Mensheviks. The Mensheviks were the minority group, and they wanted gradual socialism. They didn't want things to be that radical in nature. You had a leader that was going to come to the forefront, and his name was Vladimir Ulyanov. He basically goes by the name of Lenin, Vladimir Lenin. Everybody knows him. He was from the middle class, and he basically wanted Russian capitalism to make the social revolution possible. So he was the one that was responsible for the Bolshevik movement and that slow progression of change within Russia. In October 1917, we have a Bolshevik attack on the government, and they elected a constituent assembly, in the interim, while they were trying to figure out the whole entire government what was going on. So Lenin's Bolsheviks, they ruled socialist Russia at the period of time, which later on turned into the Soviet Union, also known as the USSR. And it was basically under as an L-party dictatorship. So it was going to take a little bit of time. But of course, Lenin's going to be coming to the forefront at this point in time in Russia and improving them with their whole entire revolution, what was going on, improve the economy, so slow socialist movement of improvement for them. So let's talk about what happened with Germany. All right, so Germany, of course, is going to be defeated in 1918 after World War I. So as we know, April 1917, so close to the end of the war, U.S. entered the war. The Allied counterattack basically materialized with the assistance of the United States. They basically were successful in crossing into the Alsace-Lorraine region by October. And of course, by the fall of 1918, Germany was already basically starving out. They were basically on the verge of civil war, too, within their own nation. On November 4th, the Kaiser actually abdicated his position, and the control was left to individuals known as Eber and a couple of others, and he was a socialist leader of the Reichstag in Germany. So the Reichstag is basically the German parliament, and they negotiated the armistice with the Allied powers, and they accepted the Allies' terms on November 11th of 1918. This is going to hurt Germany pretty much, and this is going to cause economic turmoil for the country leading up until the Second World War that we will talk about later. At the Paris Peace Conference that occurred in 1919, Woodrow Wilson, who was the U.S. president, played a pivotal role in the peace conference. They actually signed 5 separate treaties by Germany, Austria, Hungary, Turkey, and Bulgaria. So basically the losing countries had to sign individual peace treaties and reparations and other things that they were responsible for the war. Wilson was also responsible for creating his 14 points. So if you ever take U.S. history too, we talk about the 14 points that Woodrow Wilson set apart. So it was basically the foundation for permanent peace, and it also was responsible for establishing the League of Nations, which eventually later on will turn into NATO that we know. So Germany basically surrendered Alsace-Lorraine, basically giving that territory to France. They gave up territories to Denmark, and East Prussia was cut off from the rest of its territory. So basically, Germany was affected by a lot of territorial changes and a lot of reparations that needed to be paid after the war. So they were the most hurt, I think, out of the whole entire endeavor, despite the fact that they were slow to get to unity. You can see there is a map in the textbook that talks about the territorial changes, so you will see that there. So slowly read through the chapter. You can kind of get an understanding of everybody's role, and then, of course, all the wars that we did talk about as well. All right, thanks.